Good afternoon, good Erev Shabbos. Very much looking forward, as always, to this class. We are here for the Henry and Lisa Manoucheri Parsha Shiur. This week is Parshas Emor. Coming week we have Lag BaOmer. We're going to get into that topic some. And the title for today's Shiur is The Pristine Nature of Intimacy and Essentialism. Essentialism is actually the title of a book that I recommend. It's all about how a person gets down to the most important things in their lives. How do they essentialize? That includes their mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual space. You know, what do they make time for, and where are they focused, etc. This month, the month of Iyar, the classes are sponsored in loving memory of Daniel ben Aryeh Yaakov Halevi Zichrono Livracha. May his soul have an aliyah. Definitely daven and learn in his merit. Also for the merit of Refuah Shalema for Daniel ben Chaya Pesya, Israel ben Chaya, and Chaya Ruth bat Mecha. Also, may K'lal Yisrael experience true Shalom, and may we all merit to see a complete Geula speedily in our days. This week's classes are also sponsored for the benefit of Refuah Shalema of Peril Sasha Bas Peril Rivka, and Baruch Yehoshua Yisrael ben Sima, and all Chole Yisrael. I have other people in mind. I recommend that we have all people that we know in mind. Davening and learning is definitely one of the most major things that we can do to help people that need help, especially in the area of refuah, but also in general. So as I mentioned, the title for today's class is The Pristine Nature of Intimacy and Essentialism. So the question that I would like us to first begin exploring is the question of the topic of counting. This coming week, we have Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer refers to the 33rd day of the Omer. As we know, there's a commandment in the Torah to count from the day after the first day of Pesach, which the Torah actually refers as Shabbos. That's another topic for another time, that we should count from the day after 50 days. Really, that means 49 days because we don't actually count the number 50th, but the Torah still says count 50, which is also a very interesting point. And at the end of that 50 days, we're supposed to bring a special offering. Now, over the millennia, it has developed that because there was a tragic story with the students of Rabbi Akiva, that he had 24,000 students and most of them died between Pesach and Shavuos, we also have come to observe a period of mourning during this counting period. So the word sphira, which is a lot of the times how people reference these days, sphira, are you keeping sphira? Which sphira are you keeping? Refers to the mourning period of the counting, even though the word sphira just means counting. So it's also very interesting that we have this concept of counting and that there was a really harsh, really incredibly difficult story to understand, that 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died. In addition to that whole episode, which is in the tractate of Yevamos in the Talmud, we also have come to understand that the Yartzeit, the commemoration of the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, happens on the 33rd day of the Omer, along with the fact that the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying at that time. That's also not so clear. Maybe it's most of the students, because the Talmud says that they died between Pesach to Shavuos. It doesn't say between Pesach and the 33rd day. So that's also interesting how that all developed. So we're going to talk, about what is this concept that the mourning period has become a national event, and it's a hugely commemorated experience, meaning that Jews all over the world observe a period of mourning, either from the second day of Pesach until the 33rd day of the Omer, or from the beginning of the month of Iyar through just before the holiday of Shavuos. Those are the two periods, but everybody is supposed to keep a period of mourning, which means no listening to music, no cutting one's hair. Interesting that it became such an important event for all Jews throughout history. So we're going to talk about that, and also we're going to talk about the general concept of counting, which leads us to the second question. So this topic of counting is rather fascinating in the Torah. I think one of the things that I think we realize a lot in these classes is that it's so important to just ask ourselves, do we understand what's going on? Because when we actually ask ourselves, do we understand what's going on? Sometimes we get hit by lightning bolts that we don't seem to understand. So here's a really good example. There are many situations in the Torah where we need to know what day it is. For example, we need to know if it's Shabbos. We need to know if it's the 15th day that we're now going to celebrate a holiday, the 15th day of any month, right? We need to know, for example, a person who comes in contact with a corpse, what is the seventh day that he can now begin a purification process. We need to know a similar thing by a Mitzorah when he can start his purification process. We need to know a Nazir who has committed to not eat wine, not eat great products or drink wine or cut his hair or come in contact with the dead for a minimum of 30 days. So we need to know what the 30th day is. There are tons of examples in the Torah that we need to know what day it is. But the Torah never tells us to count. Except over here, by Shavuos, the Torah tells us, count 50 days. Just tell us 50 days later. And yeah, we have to keep count. Jews are supposed to be good accountants, right? So just count 50 days, and that's the way it is, right? Why does the Torah go out of its way to tell us to count? Now, there's only a couple of other times that the Torah tells us to count, and one of them is by Yovel, which is going to be next week's Parsha. The Torah tells us that you're supposed to count the 7-year cycles until you get to the 49th year. It's actually machlokas in the Talmud, if it's 49th year or 50th year, subject for another time, but there's an obligation to count over there as well. As far as I know, there's only 2 other circumstances outside of counting to Shavuos, counting to the Jubilee year, the 50th year, where the Torah says to count. And they are both by bodily emissions, one by a woman who has a bodily flow of blood that she needs to count 7 days, and by a man who also has an emission. He also needs to count 7 days. Both of those appear at the end of Parshas Mitzorah, which was just 2 weeks ago. So 2 weeks ago, we found out about the Nida, or the Zava Gedola, that a woman who has this kind of flow, she needs to count 7 days, and then afterwards she can become purified. The same thing by a man who has a flow. He has to count 7 days, and after that he can become purified. This week's Parsha, we have count the 50 days until Shavuos, and then in next week's Parsha, we have count the 7-year cycles until the Jubilee, the Yovel 50th year. So the question is, what in the world? Just tell us, after 7 days. The Torah doesn't need to say, hold up your fingers now. 1, 2, 3, right? Like, what is the Torah doing? Why in the world would the Torah tell us to count? Every other time that we need to know what day it is, the Torah just simply says, you need to know what day it is. Okay? So, you need to know what day it is. It's like, when you try to do a financial transaction and then you realize it's a legal holiday, that's on me. Like nobody says, guys, listen, make sure that you count until a legal holiday. So that's your responsibility. If for you to know the reality of what day it is and where you are and what the complications are due to time because of that, that's a responsibility on you. So that is the question of counting. Now, in addition to that, on the subject of counting, is the fact that halachically, the way that we rule is that there's only 2 of these 4 examples where you actually need to count by verbally stating a number. So last night was the 29th day of the Omer. We're supposed to say today is the 29th day of the Omer, which is 4 weeks and 1 day. We have to say that. And by Yovel, the Beis Din apparently also says what year of the Yovel or what cycle of the Yovel, what 7-year cycle we're in. Even though I think there are some commentaries who say that a Nida, a woman who has the blood flow, or a man who has his bodily emission, need to count, I'm pretty sure that we don't rule that way, even though the Torah says count. So that's also interesting. In these 4 examples, 2 times we actually say numbers, and 2 times we're just told to count. And we're still asking why we told to count, but outside of that is, once you tell us to count, why don't we actually have to count? Why don't we verbally have to say it? So that's also a really interesting point related to the numbers. Now, As often happens in this class, I discover, and it's all up to Hashem. I know maybe people think that I have this really well planned out, like last week or this week in advance, and I really don't. It's always the way it is. Very often, the Friday Shiur really dovetails with the Wednesday Shiur, and this is no different. A question that I mentioned on the Wednesday Shiur, which is a really hard question, and I'm venturing to take a foray into explaining it today, so we're going to take a stab at it today, relates to the beginning of the Parsha and the people that a Kohen is not allowed to marry. So on Wednesday, the title of the Shiur was Who Are My People? And we did a deep dive on what is holiness and what is profaning the holiness. And so what we're going to discuss today is really going to be a part 2 of that idea. But specifically, we're going to deal with a question that was raised that I said maybe we're going to deal with on Friday, which is a Kohen is not allowed to marry certain specific women. And these women should be really good people. Just because a woman is a divorcee doesn't mean she's not a good person. What's wrong with a Kohen marrying a divorcee? And just because a woman was born from parents who should not have been married doesn't mean she's not a good person. So what's wrong with marrying that woman? And if a woman herself had an illicit relationship that she shouldn't have had in her life, okay, people make mistakes. She finished with that. Hopefully she repented. And again, what's wrong with marrying such a woman? And by the way, sometimes it's not even necessarily against her. Sometimes not even with her judgment and her will. Sometimes it could even be against her will. So what's wrong with marrying such a woman? These are really hard questions. And part of me wants to say, okay, everybody, you win some, you lose some. You can't answer these questions, let's just move on. But that's not our job. Our job in the Torah is to accept that we have to ask ourselves the hardest questions and do our best to try to answer and daven to Hashem for help. And if we don't answer it so well, Bezras Hashem, in the future, we will be able to answer it well. But I am going to take a stab at it today. Now, related to all of those questions as it pertains to a regular Kohen, so just to review, a regular Kohen is not allowed to marry a divorcee. He's not allowed to marry a woman who came from an illicit relationship. Not allowed to marry a woman who had an illicit relationship against her will or not against her will. It's a certain kind, but either way, he's not allowed to marry those women. Okay, now we talk about a Kohen Gadol. And a Kohen Gadol, he's not allowed to marry anybody but a virgin, totally virgin. She had no accidents. She had no relations, nothing, only a virgin. What's wrong with a woman that had an accident and now she's technically not a virgin, but it was because of horseback riding, for example? What's wrong with that? Really? Is that a problem? Why should a high priest not be able to marry a woman who had a horseback riding accident? Why does she have to be a virgin? It seems really, really difficult to understand. Now, I'm okay with not understanding it. Kohen is special. And so for whatever reason, even though we don't know why he's so restricted in who he can marry, it has something to do with his holiness. Very nice. But I think it behooves us, if we can understand better, to try to understand better. Now, lastly, I'll point out, and this is very much related to the Wednesday class, but we did not address it as a question. So here today, I want to raise it as a question. We know that a Kohen is not allowed to come in contact with the dead, except for his relatives, any Kohen. Unless they're his immediate relatives, he's not allowed to come in contact. And a Kohen Gadol, even if they are his immediate relatives, he's not allowed to come in contact. But there's another death-related prohibition, which again, we did not mention on Wednesday. And that is, if a Kohen, a regular Kohen, has a relative that has died, and the burial has not yet happened. So in Hebrew and in halacha, in Jewish law, that's called an onain. An onain is a type of a mourner that's in a very limbo state of mourning because the corpse, the dead relative, has not been buried. That's its own status. And the rule is that a Kohen who has a relative that has died and the burial has not yet happened, and the Kohen has no contact with him, just happens to be, he has no contact with him. He's, in fact, let's even draw out the example. He's in the temple, and it's his turn to work. And now he hears that, God forbid, his brother died, his sister died, his parent died, whoever it is. He's not allowed to do the service, even though he's had no contact with any death. Well, isn't that interesting? Nothing in him has changed. He's not ritually impure. He has not left the temple. If he does do service, punishable by death. It's excision. He's cut off. It's kind of an incredible concept. He's not allowed to do service. Now, what goes along with that, the corollary is, let's say he's the high priest. He has to do the service. He's not allowed to leave the temple. He has to continue to do the service. Really kind of remarkable. So this is like a similar kind of anomaly. A Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry a widow. High priest is not allowed to marry a widow. A regular Kohen is allowed to marry a widow. A Kohen Gadol has to serve if one of his relatives died. He's not allowed to leave the temple, is the way the Torah describes it. And the regular Kohen, he's not allowed to do the service in the temple, even if he's already in the temple, if his relative died and he's had no contact with anyone outside the temple. So a very interesting set of questions. So to review, we want to understand the concept of counting. When does the Torah say to count? When does it not say to count? When do we actually verbally count in halacha, actually say numbers? In other cases, we don't. What's the whole idea that counting the days to Shavuos should somehow be days that are also days of mourning based on the deaths of the students of Rabbi Akiva? That seems pretty strange, like just happened to happen. So, hey, there was a tragedy that happened. So every year, Jews throughout the world have to celebrate a mourning period, which is really actually challenging. People can't get married in that time period. It's really interesting, all these laws, and how does it coalesce with this idea that we count? And then we have the fact that it's only 4 times in the Torah that we find counting, which is Shavuos, Yovel, that's the Jubilee, and the counting of the blood emission or the bodily emission from a male. And that's really interesting. And then we have these laws of who a Kohen is allowed to marry, who a high Kohen is allowed to marry, and all the various categories. And it seems rather difficult, to say the least, that there's anything wrong with any of these women. So why shouldn't a Kohen be allowed to marry them? So what I would like to do is suggest a concept related to counting that I'm realizing first this year. And as I mentioned, it really dovetails with the Wednesday shiur. So let's explain it like this. The concept of counting is to take a really hard look at something, evaluate it, and appreciate it. Right? That is what counting is all about. So for example, if a person is counting dollar bills, and you get distracted, now you have to start over. So counting requires tremendous concentration and focus, which another word for counting in the Torah is choshev, cheshbon, as a calculation, means to think. It means literally to think. The word sfira, which is sofer, or mispar, which is a number, means more about the numerics of it. Also happens to mean the word for story and a boundary. So there's a lot more to discuss on the cognate meanings of these different root definitions. But just very simply, just to start, counting requires a tremendous acknowledgement of what is and a focus, right? And attention. Otherwise, if you can't have attention, you really can't count. It's literally an exercise in futility to count when you're not concentrating. To take that one step further, counting is usually, not always, counting money could be different, but usually when we talk about counting, what the Torah is talking about counting is counting to an end goal, to a purpose. The idea about money is hopefully you have to keep counting money, right? And that there should be no end to it. But the idea is when it comes to money, you just want to know how much. So it's like that end goal in a certain sense. But really, it's not about that you're trying to get to a certain particular number or place. But the counting in the Torah is to get to day 50 or to year 50 or to the clean days, which are post the 7 days. So it's to get to a particular goal. That's another element for counting. So what I would like to suggest is that where the Torah mandates counting, what the Torah is telling you is that you need tremendous concentration because you're trying to accomplish something intimate. So how good is intimacy between a husband and wife when one of them is distracted. Doesn't work very well, right? That doesn't feel intimate anymore. And that's true by any really important, intimate conversation, not only between a husband and wife, just in general. It does not work unless there's extreme focus and extreme attention. Now, what the Torah is telling us is that counting to the holiday of Shavuos means we have to really be focused on the fact that we are about to have an unbelievable intimate experience with Hashem, which is what happened in the giving of the Torah when Hashem, for the only time in history, appeared to every Jew on the highest level of prophecy possible to have that face-to-face, so to speak, communication, which of course the Jews were blown away. We've spoken about that many times, but that was a crescendo of building up to that intimacy experience. That's called counting the days. So that we get focused, we appreciate the step-by-step evolution in order to achieve that intimacy. Now, the 7 years of Yovel, 7 cycles of Yovel, each one of 7 years is also about that. Every 7th year is dedicated to Hashem. So Yovel is just an exponential of that focus on how Hashem is really the king and the world is really run by Hashem and the ecology, it depends on Hashem. And we dedicate ourselves for learning that year and standing in front of Hashem. And the Yovel, of course, is therefore acknowledged and established on guess which day? Yom Kippur. That's when the shofar is blown to coronate Hashem as the very present king of the universe, with a tremendous buildup of 7 cycles of Shemitah to make Hashem as real as possible. That's why everybody has to go free, because the emancipation has to happen, because we have to serve Hashem directly, and Hashem is here. So that too is building up to an intimacy moment with Hashem that is the Yovel year. And that's the point of a husband and wife counting, so that they could be intimate again. They have the bodily emissions, and they have to be separate. And we know, and we spoke about it a little bit in Parshas Tazria, that there's not able to be full happiness in the first 7 days before the bris, because the husband and wife are separated, and so they don't have that opportunity to be together and be happy together. So counting is a way of saying anticipation and focus, and specifically focus on the other. See, because most of us don't need a lot of focus to focus on ourselves. That's the default. That's what we're going to do, right? The idea of focusing to intimacy is not to focus on, oh, good for me. It's to focus on, this is great that I have the experience of you. This is amazing because you're amazing. Now, if only us men would do that a little bit better, things might be better at home. That is the idea of the counting, I think. Now, it happens to be, I'm just going to make one more suggestion about that Shemitah, meaning counting the 7-year cycles to Yovel, and Sfiras HaOmer, counting to Shavuos, that's a national intimacy experience with Hashem. That's us Jews as a unit, collectively as a nation, which is, of course, why we talk about the unity of the holiday of Shavuos. That is really supposed to be when we as a nation unify to be connected to Hashem, so we can formalize the counting, because we're all really counting the same thing. So we can verbalize it, because it's about a national oneness experience. And so therefore we can actually articulate the numbers, because it's the same for all of us. We're all counting for the same thing, even if we have our individual experiences, but it's that Hashem has a collective relationship with our whole nation, right? That's Hashem's relationship with our collective nation. That is a unified experience. So we formalize that we're all doing the same thing by verbally counting it, because it's a national experience. But every person's bodily emission and their personal relationships, and pardon the pun, but the ebbs and flows of everybody's relationships, that's personal and that's private. And that doesn't pertain that people have that in common. So because of the private nature of it, I think maybe that's why it's not necessarily required in halacha to count, although it could be that some people say it's better to count. But that's another possible attachment of an idea to this overall concept that we're saying, that counting is all about establishing intimacy. Now, what we spoke about on Wednesday is that in order for a person to be their holiest true self, they have to be completely aligned and in pursuit of their real purpose. And for a Kohen to become distracted with taking care of the needs of the dead, when his real mission is to attach the living to Hashem and to help the living achieve their closeness with Hashem, that's considered a profanation for the Kohen. For him to profane his purpose by doing a secondary, even though it's a real good thing to help a person be buried, it's a real big mitzvah. We put it right next to marrying people. Achnasat kala is right next to Havayat Hamet, right? Accompanying the dead. That's a real thing. It's a real mitzvah. But that's not a Kohen's purpose. And so therefore he cannot profane himself by doing a different purpose than is his true purpose. And we brought the example by Noah and earlier in the Torah. So here's my suggestion. For a Kohen to marry a woman where the focus of the relationship is going to deal with a lot of the woman's past or the issues that the woman has in her personal life, is also going to distract the Kohen from his purpose. Yes, people call that baggage, but you know what? We all have baggage. So I'm not here to say the woman has baggage and the man doesn't have baggage, but a Kohen has a national responsibility to the Jewish nation, and he has to specifically be available to doing his Kohanic mission. And so for a Kohen to be involved with a woman that either has a difficult past from her parents, or a difficult past from herself, or a difficult past because she was divorced, or something happened to her, all of that can be an impediment to the focus that the Kohen has. And remember, because the Kohen are the ones chosen to always be pure, to always be available to serve, to always be available to teach people, to have that, to establish the intimacy between Hashem and the Jewish people, he needs a pristine focus. And that can be impeded by the nature of the prior events or relationships of his wife. Now, to be clear, a regular Jew can also. But for a regular Jew, because he doesn't have the national mission of everyone else, part of his mission could be to help his wife. Great. Fantastic. Wonderful mitzvah. Marry a divorcee. Marry any woman that might have had some difficulty, and you grow together. You help her, she helps you. That's wonderful. That's perfect. But a Kohen is not allowed to divert his focus from the national mission of connecting all Jews to Hashem. He has to be available for that. And so now we can understand that a Kohen Gadol, even more so, has a much more sensitized focus that he needs to have, so much so that if one of his relatives die, his brother, his father, his child, he cannot leave the temple. He is such a critical cog in that intimacy connection between Hashem and the Jewish people. We need him on Yom Kippur, right, to establish that fusion between Hashem and the Jewish people. That has to be his whole focus. He's not allowed to leave his focus for 1 second from the temple. But a regular Kohen, well, a piece of him died, as we explained on Wednesday. He's not needed for that intimacy fusion between Hashem and the Jewish people. That's the Kohen Gadol. Yes, in general, we need him, but he's suffering. We allow him to be with his family. We allow him to shift his focus. And because of that, if he stays and he does the service when his focus really is going to be elsewhere and ought to be elsewhere, that's a profanation. Because he's not really attending to the service if he's doing the service and he's distracted. So I think all of these connections, and the same thing is true of a widow. Thank you, Reb Yudel. A widow also has a prior relationship that should, in general, be less baggage than a divorce. And so therefore, for a Kohen Gadol, it's not allowed. He needs to have a woman that is totally secure in herself, has nothing else on her mind, nothing but their marriage is what she ever knew, and that works. Because he needs to have this incredibly pristine focus, as we explained. But a regular Kohen, that's so to speak, he can handle. That's not something that's going to be necessarily so distracting. So obviously, we could try to come up with more even precise definitions there, but I think as an overall approach, it can work. So now we have to understand that when we, and I'm talking about all Jews now, get bogged down with things that we'll just use the word narish, foolish, things that are foolish, things that are a waste of time, things that really distract us from our mission of bringing the light of Hashem to the world and helping ourselves and the world understand the truth of the existence of Hashem and how available He is. All of this is not living our most holy life, and it is a profanation to a certain extent. Okay, it might not have the same halachic ramifications that we talk about a Kohen, but it's definitely a major, major impediment to us fulfilling our purpose. And it could have to do with why in Parshas Emor, Mos and Kedoshim, we were talking about holiness, we were talking about staying away from the mindsets of secular ideology. And here in Parshas Emor, we're understanding the incredible nature of intimacy and how it pertains to a Kohen, which also teaches us, yes, Ari, that's correct. At the very least, it's chulin, which means even if it's not profane, it's mundane. And that's what Ari is saying. And that too is not our best use of time. So there is this book. Yes, that's correct, Rabbi Chil. That's what we're saying about a Kohen Gadol and Basula. So any distraction of herself could also affect him. So my point is that one of the things that we should all be doing in our lives is to relieving ourselves of our personal baggage and distractions. Sometimes we collect too much stuff in our physical space. Sometimes we collect too much stuff in our emotional space. Sometimes in our mental space. And sometimes we also don't have all the correct spiritual pursuits. I'm not saying yoga is not spiritual. I'm just saying it's not the best use of a Jew's spiritual pursuit. There's other more important spiritual pursuits that we call davening, for example, saying Tehillim with concentration, for example. Right? These are real ways of great spiritual connection. Even doing chesed, as we know, is a real spiritual connection to Hashem, as in the case of Avraham and the guests. Right? This is emulating Hashem. That's a tremendously spiritual pursuit. So the more that we can unburden ourselves from our distractions, then we can really focus on what counting really is. Now, the tragedy of the students of Rabbi Akiva is not being able to get out of themselves enough to acknowledge the importance of their study partner, of their friends. That, too, is a tremendous impediment to the intimacy of the Torah experience. Because if we're more focused on ourselves and we're more focused on our honor than on the honor of our fellow Jews, we're not going to get to receive the Torah the right way. Because what it really means is that we're distracted by our egos. And that is something that we have to understand is a failing of our people. Otherwise, 24,000 students would not have died. We needed their Torah, but it means that we're all, to a certain extent, guilty of focusing more on, well, how is it going to make me feel, rather than how is it going to make him feel. Unfortunately, that itself is an impediment to the intimacy relationship with Hashem. Because the only way we're possibly going to have an intimacy relationship with Hashem is if we can stop being distracted with ourselves and our egos. And so therefore, we all have a mourning period at this time as a way of reminding ourselves that when we focus on ourselves, we're not focusing on Hashem, and we're not really counting. Because counting means we're focusing on what the experience will be in an intimate relationship with Hashem. We want to show up for Hashem the right way. We want Hashem to fulfill his purpose in creation. We want to experience him, not what we're going to experience. So Be'ezras Hashem, we have this concept in mind for intimacy, and it will help us in all areas of our lives, especially if we apply it to our lives by focusing on others, by focusing on our most intimate relationships, by becoming more aware of the baggage in our lives and unburdening ourselves from that baggage. I do recommend the book Essentialism, which is what it's all about, focusing only on what's most essential in one's life. Questions or comments? Somebody also sent me some texts that I'm going to be reading while everyone else is hopefully commenting, but Aaron Yehuda is not here to lead the discussion. So if anybody wants to either raise their hand, I'll call on you, or maybe Dr. Patterson is ready to go, and I'm happy to do that.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. I'm ready with just a
Please.
few thoughts. Um, yes, the concentration and the focus. It's the focus on this day, Hayom, on this, and what is the essence of this day? What is essential about this day? This this rung in a movement of ascent. We ascend during this counting of the Omer. But each day is chesed shebachesed, gevur shebachesed, and each day has its own character, its own mission, its own calling, and the it is a movement toward greater intimacy, a deeper relation, culminating in a marriage at Mount Sinai. Yes, that is where the Zman Cherutena was realized, the season of our liberation. It's not when we come out of Egypt, it's when we set out for Har Sinai. It's when we undertake this ascent so that the vertical dimension is expressive of the horizontal dimension or our relation to the other human with our focus on the other human is opens up this dimension of height and holiness. That's where marriage becomes kiddushin. Okay. Uh, and counting. This is the essence of creation itself. Sefer Yetzirah, Sefer Safar Sipur. Creation is made, Sefer Safar Sipur. So the counting is an accounting, awareness, cheshbon, uh, taking stock, and with each step we ascend higher, and we draw what is highest more profoundly into this realm. I think that's why we start with Chesed Sheba Chesed and not Malchut Sheba Malchut. We're reaching up to draw the holiness into this realm, which enables our ascent. So, and it takes concentration. That is, I mean, that's I think you're one of the most important points you make.
Wow.
Focus, pay
Okay.
attention, Shema,
Wow.
Shema.
Yeah,
Okay. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you.
it's awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Patterson. It's beautiful. Rebuto?
Yeah, first of all, just to say to Dr. Patterson, the Baal Mekabolim start both ways. They start from Malchus, but Malchus going downwards, and it meets somebody right now in these works of Shimbi Yechoy. We meet the ascent and descent come together. But if he looks into the Kabbalah's, the counting sphere, it goes both ways. So the first day is Malchus Shabbat Malchus, and the end with Chesed Shabbat Chesed. So it's a shmitz. But the only thing that I want to tell you that. And we know the Gemara has a thing if you have to have a mitzvah tzrichas kavana or eine tzrichas kavana. The whole thing. So the Rebbeinu says a very interesting thing. That's only in the mitzvah maisius. You're taking that shows that you did it. But something that you talk, you must have kavana. And that's when you say Shema Yisrael, that's the Maisa is the Kavana. So he wants to say that there's no such a thing as there you don't have Kavanas. I just wanted to give you some praise. I mean, tell you how right you are. You like
It's a good thing I'm sitting down, Rebuto.
no, but that's an important thing because it depends
Yes.
what you're doing. Like
Yes.
today, Pink learned, we know, yes, if you have kavana, efshe, lo efshe, you're thinking, you're not thinking, you could, you cannot, you mechavan, so that's the way. But we know the most important thing when you're doing action, that can be one way, because your action talks, so not, but when you're saying things and you're intimate and you're just talking, you have to remember who you're talking to. It's something that scares me always. Because sometimes
You
the
mean
best.
you mean at home it scares you? Or you mean
No,
like
it scares me. I'm thinking I have my best ideas in my bed.
maybe that's a Shem
At
talking.
home, it doesn't scare me because my wife doesn't know my thoughts, so it's not so bad. The action counts at home.
That's
At
what
home,
you
the action
mistakenly think.
counts.
That's what you mistakenly think.
No, I don't think they know that. One thing they don't know. What the man? No way.
She's listening now, Rebuta. She's listening.
No, she ain't listening. I know her well. Whatever I do, she wouldn't. Don't worry.
Okay.
But that's a very big thing, Taka.
Shkoyach. Thank you. Anybody else want to speak?
1 minute.
Michiel?
Yes, I just wanted to touch base. I wasn't saying that. Of course, it's distraction, but I wanted to point out that if she's 12 years old and she's, her whole life is like focused on her husband if she gets married at that time. So it's not, another woman, you have yourself. Now you can become, focused on your husband. But over here, she hasn't even been able to focus on herself.
Yeah.
So that's the Cohen Gadlus, is that she's totally focused on her husband.
Yeah, shkoyach. I appreciate it. Excellent. Orly, I didn't have a chance to finish reading everything you wrote. You're writing very interesting things. Would you like to share anything, Orly? I don't know if you can hear me. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I just wanted to say that my daughter in seminary recently taught me, Rabbi Keegan was teaching them, that the concept of spira is really that we're working on our midos. So we were in the midbar at this time. We hadn't yet received the Torah, which means we didn't have that many mitzvahs to keep. So what were we doing during those 49 days? We were working on there's no such thing as a bad midah. It's how you use it and how you channel it. And the entire purpose of being in the midbar during this time was to unify the nation through working on our midos. Each one, corresponds to a different midah, and by synchronizing all of them, we were able to get along with each other to such an extent that we were able to receive the Torah. Because the Jewish people are one, the Torah is one, Hashem is one, and Hashem can only give His essence, which is unity, to a nation that is unified. So Vayifan Sham Tachad Ahar, we achieved that, and we became one with Him through working on our midos. So that's, I think, one of the purposes of this specific counting. And then if you look in the Torah for the very first time that you see the concept of sadness, it's actually when the upper waters and the lower waters were separated before, during the process of creation. The lower waters cried out and said, "We want to be close to you, Hashem, too. This is not fair. Why do the upper waters get to be close to Kisei HaKavod?" So Hashem comforted them and said, "Don't worry, a nation's going to come along that's someday going to put they're going to put salt from you, the ocean, onto the Mizbeach, and you're going to be unified with your source." So if you see something in the Torah for the first time, you know that that's the essence of that thing, which means that the essence of all sadness, because it's the first time you see sadness in the Torah, is a sense of perud, of disconnect, of not being connected to your source. And the opposite is true then, which means that all joy in life comes from a sense of connection, of being connected to your source. So I think that the purpose of counting is twofold. It's not only to work on our midos, it's also to, when you've got a birthday coming up or you've got a great trip coming up, you count down to it, you're excited about it. So we're counting down to this national experience of being unified with Hashem. And that's why, when two couples get together under chuppah, and Har Sinai was like a chuppah, we say Gila, Rina, Ditza, Ched, Va'ava, Be'ach, V'Shalom, V'Reis, all the shonos of joy come into play, because there is no greater joy than unity. All happiness comes from being connected. And all sadness, which is why, by the way, we cry salty tears, reminiscent of the ocean that cried out for the first time. Sadness comes from a sense of disconnect, and joy comes from a sense of connection. So the joy of this Chag is being reconnected with Hashem. And the students of Rabbi Akiva got it wrong because, like you said, they were too involved with their own egos and not involved with the overall mission, which was unity of K'lal Yisrael. That was the time period when we lost the second Beis Hamikdash due to Sinas Chinam. And the way to get it right and finally get the third Beis Hamikdash is to be unified, put aside our jealousy, our anger, our lashon hara, sinas chinam, all of that, and that will allow us to finally, unify with Hashem once again, unify with each other.
That was excellent. Really, really great. Everybody now wants to know when you're giving your own Zoom share.
No,
But, just to, I just want to point out that again, it's that the students of Rabbi Akiva, it's not only working on the overall national mission, they can't really connect to each other, and of course they can't connect to Hashem.
right, exactly. At the end of the day, when you're disconnected from source Hashem, you can't connect to anybody else either. So all sadness, whenever you're crying, like stop and reflect, why am I crying? I'm sad because I miss so-and-so. You're disconnected from source because that person is a piece of Hashem. I'm crying now because I miss my relative who died. You're missing a piece of Hashem. I'm sad now because I don't feel like I've done enough spiritually to be connected to Hashem. All sadness comes from that sense of parity.
That is extremely important point. I'm very, very happy you raised it. Connection is joy, and disconnection is sadness, and that's really, in general, the problem with loneliness. Even from each other, which is really a reflection of Hashem too. Yeah, that's a very, very important point. 100%. Thank you so much. So
thank you.
Hopefully you'll come back regularly.
It's Hashem.
Yes,
and disconnection is
12,000 pairs, not 24,000 students. Yes.
Right.
Exactly. Sorry, Ari?
And disconnection is the opposite of Kedusha, which is Tumah. And that's why death is the ultimate separation. So that's why it brings Tumah.
Right. And so really, Orly, if you're still there, let me go back to you for a second. That sadness that you spoke about is very nice, is in the Midrash, right? The real sadness is the death knell of death, and then giving birth in pain, giving birth. I'm trying to 1 second. Yeah, the sadness of giving birth to things that are going to die. That's where the word etzev is first appearing in the word of the Torah, and then you have atzeva libo that I texted you, that Hashem gets sad by man not being able to get out of his own self-destruction and connect to him. That's where Hashem gets sad, so to speak. All of man. Yeah.
It's interesting that the Gemara in Kesibis says 24,000, not Zigay. The Gemara in Texas Adorim says, I just have the Gemara. That's why I was showing somebody, but here it says Zigay Talmidim. So in the Adorim, Dafnuan, it says Zigay, 24,000 Zigay Talmidim. In Kesubas Daf Samar Gimel, it says only Esem Alpha Talmidim. And it's very important to see that I showed a lot of people today that what happened was his wife went out to greet him, and it says here she didn't get dressed fancy, and they pushed her. And when they pushed her, it says they ducked Salabi Yuda, it says there in the Gemara, and when they pushed her, that's when Akiva says, listen, you are mine's, Torah are hers. Now what did she do? Nothing. She just told him how wish she goes back. She didn't clean his laundry. She didn't do anything for him. And that's how big he was, the thing here, because they pushed her. That's what the story was. Look into the Gemara, look at it.
Shkoyach. Have to work on that. Appreciate it. Very, very good. Very good, Rebutal.
There's a difference in language in Kesubas and the Durham. In Kesubas it says that the Chachamim, the Talmidim, and here it says the Shammai. In the Durham, it's very interesting languages in both places.
Appreciate
Barry,
it.
thank you.
Thank you. Henry or anyone else before we go?
Yeah, just a very profound idea, to add to this. Usually I'm asked every now and then to see what's going on in Iran, and I know it's been very quiet for the past few weeks because we're destroying the economy, but I was talking to the rabbi I learned with in the evening, Rabbi Jadidi, about why there's no resolution here, why are we really stuck? And it really calmly said that as Jews collectively embracing many of the concepts that you're discussing right now, is that if we lack unity, which we do in a sense, we're not coming together. You see that in the middle of this war now with Hezbollah and Lebanon and this status quo with Iran, which will probably reignite any time with Israel and the U.S., there is such disunity still in Israel where, the left, the combination of Lapid and this guy Bennett, they're trying to unseat Netanyahu. I mean, it's bizarre. You know what? We don't our lessons. You know, we had COVID. That was the first big event. Second one was October 7th. There was war with Iran. You know, the 12-day war, the second war, another break, and we still don't get it. So, you know, what we're saying is that unless we do teshuvah, and the question is, what is really teshuvah? The teshuvah is coming together, getting away from this separation, doing away with this sadness. But we seem to be a very, very tough people, very stiff-necked people, as the Torah describes it. We just don't learn. And this lack of unity is continuing. And we talked about this in the other stream, you know, even, you know, the separation is from families and some of the stuff we brought up a couple of weeks ago, et cetera, to get that shalom, that wholeness that everybody brought up. And I took a lot of notes from all the things that everybody said. It was probably one of the most informative shooting of everybody participating. But that is kind of what I'm gathering, because I don't think,
I think you're right.
An evil nation like Iran or Hezbollah, they will not fail. They will not step down unless we get our act together. I think there's definitely a spiritual connection here.
Yeah. I think you're right about the lack of our unity, and part of what I'm thinking about while you're speaking, which I think was really on point, is that we need to all get a little more focused. And I think most of us are okay with being pretty distracted and self-centered. And, you know, we could talk about the people that we don't get along with, or that we don't like, or don't get along with us, or whatever. Or we could just talk about a much stronger relationship across the board, even with the people that we like, and even with the people that maybe, you know, are our friends, but we have to do better and more focused on that too. And I think if we all work on essentialism, right, really unburdening ourselves from the things that really don't help us achieve our purpose, and also being, therefore, having the headspace, even to just have a real conversation with people, our own children, I think that would be also a good formula for shalom across the board. You know, it's much harder to think of, okay, all the people that we don't like, how we're going to get along with them. Hopefully we can work on that too, but a good beginning is to become much more focused on our most intimate relationships. Yeah. Okay. Yes, Joseph, please.
I want to finish with a positive thought. I heard from Ben Shapiro. He said, imagine if you bring
a little louder, Joseph, just a little louder, if you can.
So he was saying, imagine if you bring a Jew from the Holocaust time of the Pale settlements of the 15th century, and you drop him today in America or in Israel. He will think that we are the Messianic time, right? He won't understand what happened. So I think we need to count our blessings and to work for continuing unity. I think we made some progress, and we should not forget how
good things are with all the problems that exist. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And really the opportunities that therefore exist.
Right. And the agency will have to make it better.
Exactly. Excellent. Thank you, Joseph, for injecting that positivity. It's true. Has the added advantage of being true, as people like to say. Okay. A wonderful Shabbos to everyone. Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. Awesome.
Thank you. Where are you in Pennsylvania?
Shabbat shalom.
Hi.